Okay, good. I think we are there. We can start. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sebastiano Toffaletti, and welcome to the Digital SME General Assembly 2021. Digital sovereignty, SMEs can do digital. So a little bit of background. The term digital sovereignty has been widely debated, as you know, but it is not yet clear what it means in practice. So at Digital SME, we would like to shed some light on this widely used term and help to produce concrete actions to contribute to a thriving European digital ecosystem. So what do we mean by digital sovereignty? Many different definitions have been given. European Commission President von der Leyen referred to mastery and ownership of key technologies in Europe in a speech in the Parliament, in the European Parliament in 2019. The European Parliament Research Service defines digital sovereignty as Europe's ability to act independently in the digital world. In our understanding, digital sovereignty is not about protectionism. On the contrary, a strong and confident digital ecosystem in Europe can contribute to global competition and helps to avoid protectionist tendencies at home. So today at our 2021 General Assembly, we will present a new white paper on digital sovereignty, which for the first time lays out a comprehensive definition of digital sovereignty along the whole technology stack, so hardware, software, and services. But we will not stop there. We will have a first panel where we will showcase European companies, European SMEs that contribute to the development of innovative digital solutions that enhance user choice for a more sustainable digital transformation. We will continue with the second panel where we would like to shed light on some of the barriers to Europe's digital sovereignty, in particular, number one, the finance gap, and number two, the representation gap. So without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce our president, Dr. Oliver Gruen, who's going to have a few words to introduce this event.
Yes, thank you very much, Sebastiano. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Mrs. Verhoeven, I also want to welcome you warmly, of course, to our event today with the topic you have mentioned, digital sovereignty, SMEs can do digital. I want to add another definition. We've heard about some definitions from Wikipedia Germany. Wikipedia Germany says digital sovereignty is the ability of an individual or a society to use digitalization in a self-determined manner. That's it. I want to contradict this because I think it's not only the question of the use of digitalization, it's a question of shaping the digitalization. So we need our own European intellectual property, and I think we need our own products. I want to add this, and also to the definition of Mrs. von der Leyen. I think it's not only about the key technologies. I think it's a wider area of the whole B2B, business to business area. Business to business is the backbone of the prosperity in Europe we have, and so we must shape its digitalization by ourselves and by our own products. So we need. I would like to say we need to attack with innovations, with European products. And in the B2B sector, we have these products. I think it's a false assumption that we don't have the system capability for this. So in a lot of areas, we have it. For instance, today we are using the tool Livestorm, which is from a company headquartered in France. So we do not use Zoom. We do not use Teams, and we do not use WebEx. So we are open to use European tools if they have the same functionality. So of course, we don't want protectionism as mentioned before. It is very clear and important to understand that we must have more sensitivity to look where is the intellectual property of the tools we are using. And in Germany, we made an initiative. It's called Germany Can Do Digital. And together with a list of, with some partners, we have launched this initiative. And in advance of the German federal elections, with the aim to raise the awareness about the innovation potential available to our society and economy, to manage the digital transformation, in more autonomous manner than using Zoom, let's say it like this. I think Europe's SMEs are the backbone of Europe's economy, I've mentioned before, but also in the digital sphere. We have 1.2 million SMEs in the ICT sector in Europe, and collaborating with the ICT companies in Europe is, let's say, like collaborating with the pacemaker of digitalization for the whole sector of all SME companies. And I think the IT SME companies provide innovative digital solutions in the area of B2B software, of cybersecurity, of data intelligence, AI, of course, blockchain. And in our campaign, we have a long list of examples of European SMEs that contribute to digital sovereignty with their solutions. So, for instance, if as a government or as a company, if you, let's say, look for a new cloud data infrastructure, so please, if it's the same functionality, don't use Amazon Web Services. Why you don't use Nextcloud, for instance? Nextcloud is a European company. Or if you're looking for a new CRM system, customer relationship management, you don't have to use Salesforce if there are solutions made in Europe which have the same functionality. Or for instance, you don't have to use a Samsung smartphone. You can use, for instance, a smartphone from a German startup, which is called Shift Phone. It is a sustainable smartphone where you can change everything. It is delivered with a introduction how to change the parts. It is delivered with a screwdriver to change the battery and all these things. And then you can use your smartphone longer. And we have a lot of studies that say if the Europeans use their smartphones about 2.5 years, no longer. If we all use our smartphones 1 year longer, it is like sharing 2.1 megaton carbon emissions. So like 2 million less cars on the streets of Europe. So all these things together are very important. And I think we must increase the sensitivity for having intellectual property, software, hardware, and services made in Europe, what Sebastiano mentioned before. And this is exactly what we are elaborating with our 15 pages long document, our white paper on digital sovereignty. And I want to point out 3 points of this paper. First of all, it's very important, the role of data. So for us, it's very important. Data intelligence and data-based business models are essential for many innovative businesses. Therefore, we need to strengthen the free flow of data, the data sharing, and the access to data. And for instance, overcome the hurdles like misinterpretation of GDPR. Well, secondly, very important is the need for openness and interoperability. Interoperability means that multiple providers can provide the same modules without modifying the rest of the stack and by using the same data. So the market becomes more open, and in a modular interoperable environment, our SME-based digital companies and economy will be able to innovate and to compete with larger tech companies. And we have a lot of other points, like, for instance, the before mentioned idea to protect our intellectual property by copyright approach and anything else. So I think it is a very interesting panel discussion right now to see what are examples of digital SMEs who provide their stack for the digital sovereignty, and I'm very happy to take part in this discussion. And now I think I want to hand over back to Sebastiano. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver. That's quite clear. I'm very honored to introduce the second keynote speaker of this event, who comes from the European Commission. We have Ms. Amaryllis Verhoeven, who is head of unit in DG GROW, head of unit for digital transformation of industry. So a very important topic that is very much at the center of our discussion today. So Amaryllis, you are with us, so the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Sebastiano, and good afternoon to everybody. I also feel very honored and very pleased to be here and to participate, at least for the time of my very short keynote speech, and contribute to a very important discussion on digital sovereignty. And let me say from the start that I like your upbeat attitude or approach to the notion of sovereignty. Sometimes, very often, one hears lamentations. Europe is not a digital front runner. So all we can do is actually protect, harness ourselves to what is coming from the outside world. That might be one interpretation of sovereignty, but there is another one. And that other one, I very much also believe in. And that is, what can we do in order to build on our strengths and see how we can become stronger in the digitalized world. And here, I think that we need to start by also analyzing where we are already strong as a European Union, because we do have a lot of assets. First of all, Europe is an industrial powerhouse. We have many very strong sectors of industry, manufacturing, think of pharmaceuticals, think of chemicals, think of fashion, think of mechanical engineering. We have strong services sectors. All these sectors stand to benefit from digitalization. Then second, we are also strong in digital. And you are examples of that. You come with digital solutions. We are strong in Europe on digital and advanced manufacturing. It was already mentioned. We are also strong on certain digital technologies. 5G, take that as an example. Or blockchain, very much developed also at the European level. Then let's also not forget we have the strength of our single market, which is the largest trading area in the world. Let's harness and let's reap the benefits from that by making sure that we deal with remaining barriers there. And then I would say we have also a strong industrial policy tradition and a very unique industrial policy tradition in Europe, based on a cooperation between the private and the public sector. It's not the American model, and it's certainly not the Chinese model, but this is a model that has actually given us a lot of advantages. And last but not least, in this area, we now also have the momentum. With the RRF, lots of money, lots of funding is available to make sure that Europe gets out of the crisis, and there is a clear commitment to make this happen. Against this background, we developed our new industrial policy strategy. And a cornerstone of that industrial policy strategy is to push for digital transformation. Now, what are the tools that we are using? There are many. First of all, there are tools which I would like to capture under the word convening power. Yeah? Traditional industrial policy tools. First of all, the so-called transition pathway. As you know, we have taken a much more deeper approach into Europe's ecosystems. And for all those ecosystems, we are now, well, not actually for all the ecosystems, but for key relevant ecosystems, we are developing together with stakeholders so-called transition pathways, which are concrete projects on how to achieve the digital and the green transition in key industrial areas. And that starts with an identification of the needs, an identification of where are the opportunities, and then common engagement on how to achieve them. We have already published scenarios for a transition pathway for the tourism sector, for the energy-intensive industries. There is more to come for other industrial sectors, And the whole idea of these pathways is that once we know where are the unique opportunities for Europe to be strong, to go for the digital transformation, which is at the same time an empowerment of its own businesses, then to massively invest there and to do whatever is needed in order to make this happen. Second, we are also taking other initiatives, such as we are mapping the vulnerabilities. Mapping vulnerabilities in order to see where don't we have enough as a Europe, where do we have too many dependencies? And the latest dependencies, notably in the digital area, is chips, where we all know that some of our industries suffer because of chip shortages. Mapping, again, is the first tool that we use in order to understand the situation. And that is mapping not only of what are the supplies, but also getting a concrete idea of what does the demand side need. And once we know that, we will take measures in order to address the shortcomings there. Further soft powers is programs to support typically SMEs when it comes to skills, but also programs to boost innovative business models through, for instance, the innovation hubs. Then other tools we have and that we try to deploy, very important tools in my view, is also legislation. Legislation, we have come up with the first ever, I would say it was a primer also in the world as such, a legislative proposal to create a framework for a human-centric AI. I know that the AI proposal has some people like it, some people like it less. We know that some businesses are concerned that this might stifle innovation if we take an overly restrictive approach. That is a debate which is currently going on, but it is important that we have a European framework. And that through our framework, we hope actually to be standard setters for the rest of the world. If we get it right, we get a framework which brings legal certainty, which responds to certain societal concerns that we have, and creates effective opportunities for our stakeholders. Platforms is another area where we have come in through legislation. Platforms is an area where legislation is absolutely needed, because when it comes to platforms, there are serious dependencies that Europe is facing. Now, we all know the story of the GAFAMs. We need to do something about unjustified market power exercised by platforms, and that's why we have gone for the Digital Markets Act. We have also tabled the Digital Services Act in order to push platforms to develop more responsible behavior and to also make sure that responsibility becomes something that can be readily enforced. These are very important cornerstones, again, to get to a digital economy, which is also a fair economy, an economy that creates effective opportunities for everyone, and notably for the newcomers, and does not only lead to a further aggregation of power in the hands of a few only. Data was mentioned. I hear you say that free flow of data is essential for the data economy, and I can only agree to that. We know that in order to have the data economy being effectively pulled off, more players need access to data, and data needs to be shared. For that, we have started building, together with stakeholders, so-called data spaces in a number of areas. They are under construction. But again, we also build on the legislative framework. Very shortly, the Commission will come forward with the so-called Data Act. And the Data Act is essentially about this. It is essentially about taking further measures to make sure that data sharing becomes an effective reality by guaranteeing fairness in contractual relationships, by also clarifying access rights, rights of access where needed, by clarifying also what to do where data are being generated machines. What are the rights of the user? What are the rights of the OEMs? What are the rights of third parties? All these issues will be addressed in the Data Act with one big principle underlying it: how to unlock the value of the data economy by making sure that data sharing becomes a reality, whilst also ensuring that the value of the data and of those that have taken initiatives to capture that value is fully rewarded. So stay tuned on that. That is a forthcoming piece of regulation, and I look forward to continue discuss all these aspects with you. So with this, I would suggest to stop my brief speech and hand over back to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marilis. I think it was a very good way and inspiring way to start this conversation, to continue this conversation with the European Commission, with the European institutions. With that, I would like to thank the two keynote speakers, Oliver and Marilis. And I would like to continue with the rest of our program today. So we will go straight into introducing the first half of the event, which is the first panel. And the first person who will intervene now is Ms. Annika Link, our Senior Policy Manager at the European Digital SME Alliance. Annika will have a slot here to present the paper which we have been mentioning until now, the white paper of digital SME on digital sovereignty. So, Annika, welcome to the stage. When you're ready, you can already start presenting the paper, introducing it to our audience.
Perfect. Perfect. Yes, thank you very much, Sebastiano. As you can see, dear audience, we're in our studio here in Brussels, in our office. So I'm joining Sebastiano live here from the office. And I'm very happy to be here in the first panel to present our Digital SME new white paper on digital sovereignty. So to develop this white paper, we've been meeting regularly with a group of ICT experts from our working group Standards and Cyber to discuss what digital sovereignty may mean for European companies, but also Europe overall. And in addition, of course, we have built on the work that has been done by our members at the national level. As mentioned by Dr. Grün, the president of European Digital SME Alliance, and our German member Whitney, they have launched the Germany Can Do Digital campaign in advance of the German federal election, where they have already discussed the term digital sovereignty and also provided a definition that we've now used in the white paper. But before going into more detail about the definition, I would like to start by explaining where we started off our considerations on digital sovereignty. So when you want to evaluate the speed and scale of the digital transformation and its implications for Europe, you have to consider a number of trends. As you can see here, today's most valuable companies are based in the US or in Asia. And in competition with those two economic areas, Europe finds itself lagging behind as regards the pace and impact of digital innovation. Also, when you consider how the digital transformation will progress, it will not stop short at digital services offered in a B2C context, but it will substantially transform Europe's most value-generating economic sectors, so automotive, manufacturing, agriculture, chemical, etc. So digital transformation is nicely described in this figure from a 2017 European Commission report. Digital transformation is a multifaceted phenomenon that is impacting innovation in all sectors of the economy. New digital technologies, including AI, have enabled the creation of completely new digital products and services and the enhancement of traditional ones. I think maybe, am I on mute? No.
No,
Okay.
go ahead.
Because I saw some. Yeah, traditional ones with digital features. So another aspect to consider, as you can see here, you have the stack, so the hardware and the infrastructures, but also the digital technologies that then transform the different industry sectors. So here it's just mentioning autonomous driving and smart manufacturing, but this applies to all the different industry sectors as well. So another aspect to consider that was also already mentioned by Oliver is the role of the European SME ecosystem and also the overall economy. So we have 25 million companies in Europe, 99% are SMEs, and 1.2 million of them are digital. So it is really important that in order to transform our digital economy, our economy to a digital one, we build on this digital ecosystem. So building on all of these considerations, we have developed our white paper on digital sovereignty, where we explain digital sovereignty. First of all, providing a definition that has been mentioned by Oliver, so the capability to actively shape the digital transition of the state, economy, and society. What does that mean, really actively shaping? It means that you need to have choice. So in the white paper, we explain how you need to have choice at the different levels of the technology stack. So both in hardware, software, and services. In the technology stack, hardware presents normally the lower layer, but here it's the highest one. But anyway, the other way around works as well. And then it's followed by the software layer. And then you have that connected to the digital services. So some business models and strategies really focus on designing hardware and software with a strong integration, making the hardware only work with their own software. And this allows them to keep customers locked in, providing digital services that only work with the same software and hence hardware devices. This creates lock-in at all levels of the technology stack. While this can have benefits in terms of innovation, it is really a risk also for competition and openness. And this is especially the case if the devices and platforms serve as gateways for other products and services. So this difficult balance between openness and lock-in is also essential for the digitalization of the industry. The development of new technologies and innovation needs software, hardware, and digital services. And at each level of the technology stack, companies need to decide if they want to opt for more open solutions or potentially face lock-in with a single provider. So this is really important to consider when we speak about digital sovereignty. Digital sovereignty is the capability to actively shape the digital transformation of the state, the economy, and society. Being able to actively shape the digital transformation requires having a choice. So with this, I would like to end the presentation and hand over to Sebastiano to hear from the other participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. I see that there are already some people who have been trying to ask questions, so we will definitely have a Q&A session later on. But let me now continue with another person who's going to contribute as a speaker to this panel, and this is going to be Patrick Hauser from the German Association of IT SMEs, BITME. Patrick is head of the Berlin office, and Patrick has been invited here. You've been invited here because your association has been extremely active in Germany, as we heard from President Grun. As well, you have launched a campaign which in English translates into Germany can do digital. You will tell us how you say that in German, because I don't speak German, unfortunately. But I think that campaign has had a lot of visibility in Germany, and you have been trying to really shape the public discussion. So Patrick, I think our audience is very curious to know what you have done in Germany and what you have achieved with this campaign.
Yes, thank you very much, Sebastiano, and also thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here at this event and also discussing this really topical and urgent issue of digital sovereignty in Europe from a German perspective. I'd like to make some contributions. First of all, I'd like to thank Mrs. Verhoeven for her quite encouraging remarks. Many important regulations to pave the way for digital sovereignty are underway. She mentioned that, and she's also right. I think we should not get stuck in complaints about how far we are behind digitally on a global level, but actually use the enormous potential we have in order to make progress. I also brought some slides with me, and I like to.
Please do. You can definitely share your screen with us. No problem.
Yes, hold on a second.
I know it works because we have tried that in advance, and okay. Here they are. Yes.
All right. I think you should see it, right?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. Well, first of all, about our association, BITME, we are the German Digital SME Association, representing more than 2,200 ICT companies. We seek to strengthen the network within our members and help them cooperate, among other things. And of course, we also get involved in policy making. We advise decision makers in a large variety of regulatory processes wherever they touch upon digital policy. And at the very core of our DNA is digital sovereignty, and therefore enabling a self-determined digital transformation in Germany and Europe. Yes. Digital sovereignty, well, the term has been already introduced a little bit. I also like to add a few remarks on this. The term has gained increasing momentum in the last couple of years. Basically, since Edward Snowden unveiled the extent to which Germany and other nations have lost control over their data and communication to foreign powers. And this somehow was the initial point. This sparked a debate about how to regain control or sovereignty over our decisions in the digital sphere. This was in 2013. And since then, digital sovereignty has incrementally become a somehow guiding principle or even an ultimate goal for policy makers and other stakeholders in the field of digital policy. In fact, by now, the term digital sovereignty is nearly omnipresent in the debate about how to deal with the digital revolution in Germany. And I think this is slowly becoming the case as well in other European countries. But with this comes a problem, and that is that there is no clear definition of what digital sovereignty actually is, and therefore we find ourselves right now in a kind of battle about what the ultimate understanding of digital sovereignty should be. And many stakeholders believe it is important to make sure that their very own definition will be adopted by policymakers because future political decisions will be made based on their beliefs and their perception of what digital sovereignty is. And that was actually the point where we thought that we as an association should get involved as well, we as BITME. And the first step we undertook is we had to find out what we think digital sovereignty actually is. And our definition, fortunately, and I'm quite happy about this, was also adopted by European Digital SME Alliance in their white paper, as has already been mentioned. We look at digital sovereignty from a supply side. That means we do not only want to be self-determined in ways of data protection or cookie settings, but in terms of developing and providing the technology needed in order to transform our economy and society, as our president, Oliver Grün, has already mentioned. We want to provide hardware, software, and digital services for all essential tasks and areas of digitization. And we want to ensure choice, not protectionism. So this is not about some technological nationalism, but we actually want people and countries to have a choice. What tool, what product, what service do they want to use? The second step we had to undertake was to explain this perception, this definition, to relevant people, policymakers in the first place. And we want every relevant political stakeholder to know that digital SMEs are key in order to achieve digital sovereignty. This has to be very clear. And well, and then as a third step, we thought, okay, well, if we want people to understand, then we have to deliver concrete and practical examples so everyone gets it. And this is where we started to initiate our campaign, Sebastiano, that you have already mentioned. Germany can do digital, or Deutschland kann digital, as we say in German. And we based that campaign basically on two major pillars. One is a platform to showcase innovative products and solutions by our members in order to demonstrate that we have the technical ability to create and provide crucial digital services in Europe and Germany, and therefore offer alternative choices so we can reduce dependencies from big tech, as Mrs. Verhoeven has already mentioned, and remain autonomous in the way we design the digital transformation. Let me give you an example. Among these success stories are cloud providers that help the German government with the administration of COVID-19 test results. There are AI providers that help organize shifts in hospitals. And many people were impressed by what our digital SMEs are capable of, be it in terms of e-government, of health, infrastructure, and so on. So first pillar was a searchable platform with success stories to actually raise awareness about what we're capable of as digital SMEs. And second, we wanted to provide a discussion forum. We have had a very important year in Germany with numerous elections on state level, but also, as you certainly know, on federal level. We just elected a new parliament, and this provided an important window of opportunity for us to get across our message on digital sovereignty, since a new government is about to be formed as we speak. And thus, we invited several key decision makers in order to debate digital sovereignty with our members and made sure they learned about our perspective and the aforementioned technical abilities that our digital SMEs have to offer. There's certainly much more to tell about this campaign and a lot of details and about the single virtual debate forums that we did, but. Looking at the time, I'd like to close with some remarks that I think are very important. And I'd like to call upon everyone in the European digital SME family. Let's join forces. Let's work on this together. Let's come to a mutual understanding of what digital sovereignty is. And I think this white paper gives us a fantastic foundation to do so. As has already been mentioned, digital SMEs make up for 4% of all companies in the EU, and that is a lot. And it means that we are a key factor to create a self-determined digital transformation of our economy and society and reduce dependencies from big tech. This certainly requires a lot of explaining and a lot of awareness raising. So I kindly invite everyone to contact me if you want to know more about our campaign, exchange ideas, and so on. But for now, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, I think you and your association have been talking about digital sovereignty really for years. I heard yourselves talking about that even before the topic of digital sovereignty was even mentioned in the Brussels circles in Europe. So really congratulations for having been successful in at least raising awareness about the importance of it. And I'm really confident that your campaign will be able to influence a little bit the balances in the German political environment. Let me continue with inviting to the stage three companies, which among the many we have in our family, three companies, three SMEs, which are digital and which are very much contributing with their innovation, with their own view on digital sovereignty. So three companies that will deliver a little bit of a pitch, not really a commercial one, but rather to show how their technology, how their innovation is contributing to provide more choice, is contributing to demonstrate that Europe can make digital, and is contributing by being SMEs which are at the forefront of innovation. So I'm very happy to have with us, first of all, Chiara Casoni from company Gattaca. The company is from Spain, although her name sounds more Italian. She's the digital marketing specialist at the company Gattaca, and the company has an innovative way to manage digital identities using technologies such as blockchain. So Chiara, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your company and how you think you can contribute to make Europe more digitally sovereign.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. And yes, my name is actually Italian, so that's the catch. But so to tell you a little bit more about Gattaca, we're an MIT-born cybersecurity company that provides compliant, secure self-sovereign identity technology, or SSI technology. Our mission as a company, as a team, is to give users back control of their data and to ensure their safety online and transactions. So our platform includes an ID wallet for unverified credentials, so users can have passwordless, hyper-secure access to digital services. And then it also includes credential issuance tools for trusted authorities such as governments, universities, and also single sign-on authentication tools for providers. And we're actually the first market-ready solution in terms of SSI that's integrated with the European blockchain network called EPSI. So that's a little bit of background on Gattaca. Now diving more into digital sovereignty and kind of what I was hoping to do is combine it with the idea of self-sovereignty, which is the background behind self-sovereign identity. So both digital sovereignty for the region and self-sovereignty for individuals have the goal of controlling or owning or having key mastership of technology, data, and information. On one hand, we have organizations and governments, and then on the other hand, we have citizens. When combined, digital and self-sovereignty can become the linchpin of technological and economic growth in the region. So for those of you who are not familiar with SSI specifically, it's essentially a new authentication method that provides hyper-secure and passwordless access to digital services. And it's basically one single master key for all your digital services worldwide. So you won't have to do passwords and kind of paperwork and all of that, a little bit more bureaucratic processes. And the great thing is that Europe has already realized the importance of being a leader in blockchain and specifically in self-sovereign identity. And it's already calling for this technology to be implemented across all member states. So for example, Germany has initiated collaborations with Spain, Netherlands, and Finland for self-sovereign identity cross-border use cases, and they have publicly committed towards building these regional SSI strategies. But it's important to note that it's mostly thanks to SMEs and innovative technology startups that Europe has been able to position itself as a leader and probably one of the most advanced regions in the world within SSI. So what we believe and what we've seen that is working is that by working with European SSI SMEs, digital identity data not only stays in Europe, but it remains with each citizen. So it's making a way for a more efficient issuance of identity credentials and also leaving space for the exploration for more disruptive and locally born technologies. So I guess in terms of the sovereign concept, sometimes it can be connected to anti-protectionism, but that's far from the reality when you're analyzing digital identity in the blockchain space. So key technology providers in Europe are already born with a global vision and with the idea of international interoperability. So not only Europe, but going beyond that. And this is why the definition of global standards, and I believe we've made mention to this previously in this panel, is the definition of global standards and interoperability is not only imperative, but the great thing is that it's already a reality. So most nations have adopted these standards and are starting to test cross-border use cases, as mentioned previously with Germany and Finland and Spain, but also with programs such as the Early Adopters Program by the European Commission, which has established these use cases for their blockchain network. And so the definition of global standards and this movement towards interoperability, it's a consequence of successful co-opetition models where competing companies are collaborating very closely in the definition of standards. And the most important aspect for digital identities to be successful and in order to achieve digital sovereignty as a region is truly this. It's to leverage a regulatory and technological framework to which all tech providers must abide to. That way, that can provide all agents in the ecosystem with the necessary trust and tools. So I guess with this line of thought, the European Commission is already working on providing these frameworks and for the entire system, basically. On one hand side, the new IDAS amendment or the new eIDAS proposal was published to include key concept of self-sovereign identity. And then on the other side, we have the European Commission working together with member states that have already worked very hard to develop these technical specifications for SSI in Europe. We believe that both of these initiatives are fundamental, but we are aware that the work is not done, and of course we have a lot more to go. The rapid approval of the new IDAS regulation is essential, but so is providing EBSI, the European Blockchain Network, with the necessary resources, because what we've experienced is in the last few months, due to insufficient support, its progress has stalled. And that's exactly what we have to try to avoid. So I guess to close, SMEs have been at every step of the way placing Europe as a leader in blockchain technologies and specifically in the SSI sector. And with that, it's very important to help them scale rather than perpetuate the dominance of big techs in the region who will try to get or are already trying to get into this space, but it's important to still keep the priority on the SMEs who have been ceaselessly determined to get their products with a European vision, with that protective and secure vision to the market.
Thank you, Chiara. I think you said many interesting things, but at least I want to retain really the fact that from my point of view, your company really showcases a good example of European entrepreneurship, whereby we propose a different model of digitalization of digital services, which is really rooted in the European values. So you try to really make services that embody those European values like privacy and self-determination. Let me invite now the next participant in this panel, the next very successful European SME, digital SME, which we wanted to invite here is Rémi Berthaud from Luxembourg. He is the Chief Technology Officer of company Passbolt, which has an innovative solution for cybersecurity and for keeping passwords safe. I also want to say that your company has obtained the label cybersecurity made in Europe, which also is a proof that your company is a European one, that your IPR is in Europe, that your cybersecurity software doesn't have backdoors, and it's a very good way to showcase and to demonstrate how you adhere, to this European project. So Rémi, would you like to tell us a little bit more about your company and about what you think about your interpretation of digital sovereignty?
Hi, thanks a lot for inviting us to speak today. It's very nice to see everyone in the chat. When we started building Passbolt, which is an open source password manager for Teams. We looked for other solutions that were on the market, and we didn't find a solution that was representing our values. So in these recent talks by Patrick and Chiara and yourself, you talk a lot about values, and this is how we start. We don't start with the technology, we started with the value and the people. And you can define it in positive terms, like we want privacy, we want interoperability, but you can also define it in terms of what you don't want. And you also mentioned that we don't want mass surveillance, we don't want the censorship of journalists, we don't want software backdoors, we don't want the aggregation of power in the hands of few players. And these positive and negative terms are basically two sides of the same coins. So when we define Passport, we looked at our values. We looked at, okay, we want interoperable software. We want zero tracking. We want encryption system that you can interchange. So if you don't like my encryption system, you can basically bring your own. We work with open standard. Our security model is completely open. We are 100% open source, even for the paid version. So we really tried to work from there because we couldn't find any software that was doing that at the time. And so we are based in Luxembourg, and we also have the Made in Luxembourg label on top of the Made in Europe label, which is something we're quite happy with. And we are used by 150,000 people from all over the world. So surprisingly, even company based in the US prefer sometimes a small European solution because they actually represent their values. So when you look at, for example, when you ask a system administrator, a worldwide study said that 80% of the system administrator would prefer a software that is open source. So it's not surprising that even system administrator from the US would actually adopt our solution because we are 100% open source. And so that's how we've approached this password space. And we tried to bring as well our own innovations in terms of like usability, or to make things easier, because it's easy to get scared about what nation state can do in terms of technology, and basically become paranoid about security when it comes to these big actors. But the reality is millions of people are still using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as their password, you know, or like, so you have to start from the basics, and the basic is keeping your password safe. 80% of the data breaches currently happening worldwide are because people use passwords in multiple systems, or passwords that have their first name and their birth date. So I have a lot of talks with my colleagues on where do we stop with, you know, risk, and which risk we should cater for. And what I encourage SME to do is basically start with the basics. Start with what is the low-hanging fruit in terms of security that you can implement. And good password management practices is definitely a big one that a lot of SMEs can gain from.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Remy. No, really. Again, I like very much your approach, starting from values and developing technologies that matches with those values. This is, I think, a good example of the European way, the European approach, which is not the US one, it's not the Chinese one. I think we try to demonstrate that there is a European way, to digitalization. Let me continue with the third and last panelist here, Jonathan Selby, who's the CEO of the Swedish company Universis. This is a very innovative company that develops really technologies that support security and surveillance by drones with autonomous systems. So you are also in a very innovative technological space. Jonathan. So what is your take about digital sovereignty and how you think you interpret it and you contribute to it?
Right. Yeah. Well, look. I mean, as you say, work for universes. It's actually more towards ground vehicles than drones where we work. But it's, as you say, it's to do with autonomous systems. It's primarily to do with computer vision as well. So it's using cameras to get information about the public environment. And a lot of the data we get, we work with public sector like cities and road transport authorities. And so all of the data we extract from cameras, from images, we send up to a cloud, and then that cloud distributes it to a dashboard, and the cities and the people responsible for our roads have better information about what is going on in the world. And so all of that data is used to make the world more efficient. So it's for a good cause. All of our infrastructure is based upon US services, Amazon clouds, other types of infrastructure like that. And so as a result of dealing with a lot of the public sector organizations in Europe, we have found a lot of complexity in the use of these US services with the need for example, privacy of personal data. We make huge efforts to not capture personal data, but in the end, it is a camera that we use. And that camera is in the public environment, and almost by mistake, we happen to cap pictures of people. The computer vision that we have deliberately gets rid of that personal data. Just to be clear, we do not want it at all. We're detecting potholes and traffic signs and things like that. But it is nevertheless an added complexity for us as an SME operating in that sphere where we have European regulation, US provided services, and the regulation and the service doesn't necessarily match, and that causes complexity, it causes friction for our business. So when it comes to something like digital sovereignty, that's extremely interesting from our side. I think it's a fantastic aspiration to retain some kind of control over the services and tools to enable digitization, but it's also crucial so that the regulation and the services provided align, so that regulation like GDPR can be adhered to, and the services and products that we can offer into the market then don't fall foul of some of these inconsistencies, if I could put it that way. So we more come from the point of view, rather than someone who is aspiring to digital sovereignty ourselves and helping on that journey, we more see ourselves as an SME who is applauding from the sidelines, if I can say that, to say this is a really fantastic initiative. We support it. I think it's going to be great for our business and other SMEs, so that we can avoid these types of operations, these types of conflicts that we've experienced with GDPR, and enable us to deliver a more complete service to our customers.
Right. Very good. With this, I would like to go into a little bit of a second half of this discussion, trying to make it a little bit more interactive. So for a start, some of you have started already, but I would like to invite everyone in the audience to request to intervene, to post your questions in the question function, or you can even ask to intervene directly. I'm not sure we can give you the camera, but we certainly can give you the mic. So if you want to ask your questions, this is your time to do so. I will start myself with a follow-up question to some of the speakers here. Perhaps I will start with you, Patrick, as you presented the German Can Digital campaign and your ideas about digital sovereignty. So looking at the German and the European, especially the European political level, what, in your opinion, could be political measures to support digital sovereignty at EU level? So what would be your requests, I would say, to the EU level, but also to the German level? Why not?
Well, only on Monday, two days ago, Commissioner Margrethe Vestager has spoken here in Berlin at the Humboldt University. And she said that when those huge platforms came, They made many things easier in our lives, but we've also given away sovereignty, and the companies behind these platforms became very powerful. And the effects of this are still present today. For example, we see lock-in effects that lead to market foreclosure. So not everyone can participate equally in the market because gatekeepers won't let them. And this stifles innovation, consumer choice, and eventually digital sovereignty. Why is that? Because companies like our members will only invest in developing new products if there's something to gain in the market. And this requires a level playing field with clear rules. And this is the environment I think we need, in which smaller players can actually challenge bigger competitors.
Patrick, sorry, just to understand, what kind of, can you give me an example? What kind of markets you are thinking about? You're thinking about, I don't know, software services to
the App Store,
government, or,
yes,
or just what is it? Where do you see this presence of gatekeepers or companies with big market power that exclude a little bit other players, at least in your experience?
App stores is a great example. Companies have become so powerful that they make the rules. They are the gatekeepers. They decide about who will use their platform and who doesn't. We've also seen that. We've also seen quite prominent cases with Google, where the European Commission made a decision on how Google is allowed or not to present certain results in their results. I could also think about Amazon and their power to decide on which products will be put on display in their platform, and so on and so forth. And here comes, to answer your question, the good news is that, as many of you know, the European Union has extensive competences in the field of competition policy. And right now, the Digital Markets Act is underway, a crucial framework that will create an important new set of rules to create a more level playing field so everyone can participate more equally. And that is great news for our members. Actually, we do not need more money or more opportunities. We actually need the opportunity, from my point of view, to challenge those that have become too powerful. And I think we have all the know-how and all the technical abilities that we need in order to still gain a lot in the market for in the B2B sector, as Oliver Grün has already mentioned. So this is some good news. I can also think about the AI framework that has already been mentioned, or the Data Act that will actually ensure that companies, digital SMEs, for example, will gain easier access to data. And once they get this access, they will be able to develop new business models. Finally, maybe one thing I would like to quickly add is the digital attacks, a huge issue to discuss in an own panel. But once everyone pays their fair share of taxes, it will be more difficult for large-scale players to evade taxes and save money in huge amounts. It will be more difficult for them to buy up, to acquire small companies that are very innovative and promising at an early stage, and all of this will provide more fairness and more competitiveness overall.
Yeah. Thank you, Patrick. Okay, I have more questions for you and for the others, but I just want to tell the other panelists, if any one of you want to react to what we heard from Patrick, he spoke about different things, the role of platforms, the role of the digital taxation, and so on. Remy, you asked.
Yeah, I just wanted to have just 2 sentences on the App Store. It's a really a true issue because, for example, we are experiencing it right now. Like the Passport app is ready for mobile. and it is currently not listed in the App Store because we do not support Apple ID as an identifier, even though we don't support any third-party authentication system because Passport is an authentication system. And they refuse to publish it until we allow them to basically put their hands in our pockets. So it's a real pain. And when you want secure app distribution, it's the same for web extension, browser extension that allows you to fill in passwords in web applications, in web forms. Then you also need to go through the gatekeepers, and the rules keep changing all the time. It's based on what they feel is best for their business model, and the rules are not fair, and they change all the time. So it becomes very unpredictable to build a business when these big players don't have a level field to compete with us.
That's absolutely interesting. And Remy, do you think you or your company, you feel comfortable in speaking out publicly against a company like Apple, or do you feel you are somehow at risk?
Well, I use an Apple computer, so I hope they won't come to pick it up. But it's complicated. It's like I think going public and speaking out is the last resort that you have. So you first have to play by their rules and like appeal, go through the regular channel to appeal. Sometimes it's just one person that is not open-minded, and maybe you'll have more luck on the next reviewers. So I think it's easier to speak as a group than to speak as a to have like just one head like coming out of the crowd and be an easy target when you're small.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm saying this because we hear from many companies we represent as an association. They tell us, okay, you speak out. You need to do it as an association on our behalf because we cannot speak. It's too risky for us. We don't want to do it. So, but I'm glad there are a few companies who are ready to do it because it is very important for us to build, enough momentum around these SME concerns that we are trying to raise vis-a-vis the policymakers. But let me maybe continue with a different question to Chiara, perhaps, because you spoke about the importance of digital identities for sovereignty. And we know that your company has chosen to use blockchain solutions for that. So what do you think is the advantage of these federated solutions such as blockchain over other digital identity solutions?
Yes, so I guess the first point is important to clarify that federated digital identity solutions are technically what self-sovereign identity is trying to substitute. So federated solution implies a centralized structure, and it touches upon, for example, the simple sign-on of Google or Facebook or LinkedIn, which basically what they do is consume all of your data, and afterwards you have no control over what they do to it. But basically the importance of digital identity solutions, particularly the decentralized one, is where users have control over their personal information. So they control who has access to it, when they have access to it, and they can revoke that consent at any time. So, for example, instead of doing that simple sign-on process, login with Google, it would be, for example, through an SSI provider such as Gattaca. So you would do login with Gattaca, but in that sense, you're the one. It's only a technology via that's going to take you through to your authentication. But all of the credentials are always in your control, and you're the one that gives consent to the information they're requesting. So if they're requesting your first name, last name, and date of birth, but then they have the optional task for address and location, then you can remove those and continue your access to that service provider however you wish, but you don't have to give all of that. So that enables the minimum disclosure aspect and characteristic, which is very important. So that's, for example, the big example that is always presented is why every time I go to a bar and they ask me for my age, you have to provide your ID card that has all of your personal information. So why can't I just simply show the date of birth and that's it? So that's particularly why self-sovereign identity is important. It's more about being in control over your personal information, no longer being susceptible to identity fraud, which of course it will still be an issue, but it's drastically reduced once these service providers don't have your data stored in their databases, and when you finally can say, well, I'm not using that service anymore, I want to revoke consent, and it's just one click in your ID wallet that says revoke consent, and then you're no longer linked to that service. So I think that's the most important part of self-sovereign identity, particularly for citizens.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for citizens, but I'm sure we will soon realize that it is also important at an industrial level. I mean, there are many initiatives that have to do with the traceability and information about the products and devices. There's one initiative at European level called the Digital Product Passport, where they want to make available in all the supply chain all the information about the materials, etc., of a product. And some people are saying yes, but there is issues. We don't want this data to be available to everyone. There are intellectual property right issues and so on. And some people have rightly said yes, but you can use the centralized solution. So there's not going to be anyone storing the information anywhere, and you can make available all the information that is needed, not everything. So I'm very optimistic that these technologies will be able to solve more and more problems, also societal problems in the future. Let me ask a question also to Jonathan, because you touched a bit upon the role of data in your intervention, and I think your company provides solution for smart cities and sustainability. So how do you think it is important for in your business openness and availability of data? What can we really do if more data was available?
I mean, it's utterly crucial, right? I mean, I think this is the pitch we're trying to make here, which is that we're trying to develop software that allows people to obtain data about assets that they're particularly interested in, but we don't want to own any of that data. In fact, indeed, we want to work with the public sector, who then makes the data as open as it possibly can be for the public sector organizations to use, but of course, even flowing all the way down to all of us as citizens, to make the data as open as possible in that sense. I think in making it open, there is always the concern about the privacy aspect. Chiara was touching on with the control over the privacy. In our sense, because we're having a camera in the public environment, you sort of forego that control because you don't know you're having a picture taken of you. But I just say there are tools and systems in place that we've done to make sure that is respected, I guess, and so that the data we get through our camera is sanitized in that way. And then our ambition is to make it as useful as possible, and to spread it as far and wide as possible into the public sector, into the smart cities, the different organizations there as well, and to do it with tools and technologies that don't constrain its use in some way. So don't fall foul of some of these US-led systems, let's say, or maybe not US-led, but larger market actors that then can control it in some way, because the systems we've built have been based upon that. So if we can achieve that by working with them, by encouraging them to come along with us on our journey in this way, to support this kind of digital sovereignty so that they can still provide their services whilst enabling the digital sovereignty aims to be met, great. If not, have to think again.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think we're going to sometimes have any European alternative to those US companies, or you're not very optimistic?
I hope so, right? I mean, there are already some alternatives that we can use and we can go to, but they inevitably moving to those. It is, I would say, it's not quite the same scalability, if you can put it that way. If you go to a single source like one of these larger market actors, the thing that's attractive is you only have to do it once and then you go far and wide. Of course, that's the thing we're all worried about. They have such control because they are so far and wide. So it's a sort of the double-edged sword, I suppose. If there was some interoperability by using standards and regulation, which meant we could achieve both by developing it once and then putting it into different places and achieving that digital sovereignty by everyone adhering to the same standards, maybe that would be a nice way around the problem.
Yeah.
That remains to be seen.
Okay. Let me go back to Remy, because we mentioned that your company is one of the first adopters of this label, cybersecurity made in Europe. Why did you decide to apply for this label, and how do you think this is going to help your company to differentiate yourselves as a marketing tool?
I think when you're a small company, it's important to send signals to your potential customers or existing customers that you represent certain values or that you meet certain security criteria. And when it comes to certifications and labels, in the US, they have a lot of popular tools such as SOC 2, which has been invented by the American Accounting Association, and that is now basically the go-to audit for SaaS company or for like internet companies in general. And we do not have such instrument at the European level. So we are always interested in getting some form of recognition at the European level. And there are some national certifications available, for example, with ANSI in France and BSI in Germany. And they are quite complicated to implement for small businesses because they are quite costly. And so there is currently a European certification for cybersecurity that is in the work. There is also initiatives like at the local level, for example, the CNPD, which is like the data privacy regulator here in Luxembourg, is working on a label for GDPR compliance. And all of these tools are ways for us to build trust with our customers. The same way or extreme transparency when it comes to like security by showing everything, like the result of an audit, the code source, the source code, is how we build trust. So for us, when we are a cybersecurity company, it's essential to have more tools and tools that are recognized in Europe to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think the link for this label was also in the chat. So if anyone is interested, they can follow up over there. I wanted to take also a question from the audience. There is Eva Hartmann, who has been typing a question. I can read it. It was a question for Chiara, but I don't know if we can also try to give the mic to Eva, so she could ask the question herself live. Let's try. She's invited, otherwise, if she... Okay, Eva, please. I'm not sure it is really working, so I'll just read it out because it's a question I also had. We discussed it with Chiara earlier, so I think. Oh, Eva, you're there, so you can ask your question. Maybe you can say who you are and then ask a question.
Yeah, thank you for joining the panel. Yeah, I'm Eva. I'm actually based in the UK, but just for work reasons.
Welcome.
I was just wondering, Chiara, and then it's a more general question. When we talk about blockchain solutions, and we have heard several times that the EU is really at the forefront, and quite often it's not linked to the other problem that we have with blockchains, which is the energy consumption problem. And I was just wondering, and I can imagine that there must be solutions, particularly if there's more collaboration involved. And so I was just wondering, Chiara, if you have addressed the problem, and if so, how, so that we really bring also the sustainability dimension back into the picture as well. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to ask that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. And that's a great question and ever more relevant. We see it in the news a lot, especially with the craze that there is of crypto right now. But I think right now the important part to notice is that blockchain in the digital identity space, particularly for self-sovereign identity technology, it's not transaction intensive. So the only thing we use blockchain for is to store specific data, never personal data, but for example, public key, private keys. So it's more of a transactional instant situation rather than a constant trading or energy consuming process. That being said, I think it's important to note is that, for example, every week or every month, a new blockchain technology or blockchain network comes to the market that is said to be more energy efficient, less negatively impacting the environment. And so that tied in with having the SSI tech providers being interoperable, and a key characteristic of being interoperable is being blockchain agnostic, which is something that we have basically valued a lot at Gattaca. And that's precisely for moments like these when, for example, your client is switching from an Ethereum blockchain to another blockchain that might be more energy efficient. Your SSI provider should have the capacity to adapt with the client to a more energy efficient situation or energy efficient process. And so I guess that's one way that the SSI sector is mitigating, aside from the fact that it's not very transactionally intensive, the use of blockchain, but also having that characteristic to adapt to different blockchains that are better. And that not only helps the environment, but it also helps clients because it avoids vendor lock-in, because it doesn't even have to do with the environment. If they want to switch to another vendor that has a different blockchain technology, and their SSI solution has to be compliant with all of that. So I guess it goes back to the interoperability that seems so present in this conversation.
Yes, thank you, Chiara. That was, I think, a very valid question, and you answered well to that. But that helps us also. That question helps us to bring back in the issue of sustainability, which is also something which is very central now, especially to the European debate. And perhaps I could ask this question to Patrick, because I'm sure you and your association have been thinking about this. So also in line of in view of what has been presented by Jonathan, perhaps. So Patrick, how do you think we can link the concept of digital sovereignty with the concept of sustainability? Is there anything that we can say in that respect?
Yes, well, many companies from various industrial sectors often perceive climate protection as something negative that imposes costs and creates other obstacles to them. But we think that there is a different way to look at this. We could actually see it as a huge window of opportunity, an opportunity to use digitalization in a purposeful manner to successfully combat climate change. And here's an interesting fact that also relates to what Eva just mentioned. The amount of carbon dioxide emissions, CO2 emissions that will be saved until 2035 by the help of digital solutions is 12 times the amount emitted by digital solutions themselves. So a very positive ratio. If we use digital technologies wisely, we can actually help with sustainability. Many of our members create amazing digital solutions in order to reduce emissions. I could think, for example, of artificial intelligence that governs traffic flow within cities, or that governs the use of street lights and make sure they work in a more efficient way. But also software is super important because it governs hardware, and it also governs eventually the energy consumption of devices, and that leads to more longer or better longevity and creates less waste, right? Because we can use our devices longer. Also, we have a member Shift Phone, for example, that use a modular way to construct smartphones. So there are many ways to actually use digitalization in order to help with sustainability. So coming back to your question, let's not wait until others sell their green tech products to us and we become again dependent in a digital context. Europe can still become the place that is recognized for smart products and services that enable us to use digital tools to live and produce and consume in a more sustainable way. And if we become the provider for that certain sector, then of course that also helps us with digital sovereignty eventually.
Yeah, I see. Thank you, Patrick. Perhaps we are getting towards the end, and we have a really few minutes left. I know there is a question from Giacomo Benvenuti in the audience. You have a lot of, I don't know if we can try to give the floor to Giacomo. You have elaborated a little bit of comments, and so Giacomo, if you can try to make it as short as possible, asking your question, and we will. Some of the speakers hopefully will try to answer that. Is he available to join?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, Giacomo, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the floor. I was just asking, yes, I think that self-sovereign identities are very good and interesting approach to solve many problems for digital sovereignty, but in my opinion, it's not enough because you need to have governance, to have self-sovereignty, you need to have to be able to issue governance rules, and you need to be able to track the information, otherwise you cannot enforce anything. And today there are so many information around, even for each person, that even with platform it's tough. And what we will need will be to have support from objects with artificial intelligence. So without that, it's not possible to have a user-centric approach, and so you will have to rely on platforms. And if you want to have objects supporting you, you have to extend the same concept of self-sovereign identities to objects. And today is absolutely no technology to do that. So no mature technology. We are working on that, but there are no mature technologies. And so what? It means that if you cannot go fast enough, you cannot enforce in time, and they change it seems it was Patrick or Remy that told us that they just change each 2 days the rules for platforms like Google and things like that. If you cannot go fast, if you cannot have really support from artificial intelligence, no way just to follow, because you are bombarded by hundreds of different platforms, and it's just impossible for single people or even organization just to manage it. And so for me, the real bottleneck today is just to find out a way to have a user-centric approach with self-sovereign identities also extended to objects. I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you, Giacomo. We are really running out of time, but let me see if there is any of the panelists who want to try to elaborate on that point of self-sovereignty. It doesn't seem to be the case.
I think I was just a little bit confused of what you meant by self-sovereignty for objects. So what do you mean by objects?
I think
we've lost him.
And okay, perhaps. I think it's unfortunately too late to go into a conversation. We can obviously continue bilaterally. I just wanted to take we don't have time left, but I wanted to also ask Annika, who was giving the first introduction of the digital sovereignty white paper, to help us, to share with us a bit of, what's your view about this conversation. Do you have any other comments that you want to share with us about this conversation?
Yes, thank you, Sebastiano. I just wanted to mention a few things that have been mentioned by the speakers. I just wanted to highlight that we have sent on Monday a letter to the European Parliament about the Digital Markets Act, which is really one of the pieces of legislation that aim to create a level playing field for companies in the digital markets. And some of you have already signed that letter. I just wanted to call upon everyone who is interested in this topic to join our efforts. I put the link here in the chat, but you can also find it on our website. And here we're picking up many of the topics that have been mentioned with regards to maybe some rules in the with the some problems companies may have with app stores, but also interoperability in general. And and then secondly, I wanted to invite everyone also to contribute to the discussion on digital sovereignty. We have issued this white paper, which means that it's not a final document. It's a document that is there to provide a foundation for discussion. And we're very, very happy for your comments and ideas to fuel this debate. We've laid out some principles, some ideas to form a basis for a discussion, but I think it's, as Patrick also said, it's not finished. It's something where we need a lot of different heads to come together to think about what could be the best way to go forward. And it's been really interesting to listen to all of you. I'd also like to take the opportunity to again thank all the people who have contributed so far to the white paper, so in particular members of our working group standards and cyber. And but also to everyone who has shared comments and feedback. Yeah. And with that, yes, back to you, Sebastiano.
Okay, thank you, Annika. And with this, I also wanted to thank all the panelists here, yourself, Annika, Remy, Chiara, Patrick, Jonathan. Very good to have you here. With this, I'd like to move to the second panel. So I'd like to ask the speakers in the second panel to activate your cameras. Bye, Jonathan, and bye, everyone. Patrick, Chiara.
Bye, guys.
Thank you again. So the speakers in the second panel, they can activate their cameras and they can come on stage. We will shortly start. So as you know, as we have in the program, the second panel is about discussion about the finance and representation gaps. How to support the tech sector in Europe. This is the question to the panel. So we want to address these two gaps that exist. They are perhaps somehow even connected to each other. Why is Europe lagging behind? What are some of the issues or the barriers that still exist? So perhaps let me start with Fabrizio Morgera. Hello, Fabrizio. He's your senior investment officer at the Investment Bank, and so you have yourself a lot of experience also in the private sector, in the investment and the capital markets. So you have been looking into the finance gap. So the role of SMEs in Europe's digital transformation, venture debt. So what is your view on this issue of the availability of essentially capital to finance the growth of European companies, European startups, and companies in the digital sector in general? Where are we compared to the rest of the world?
Hi, Sebastian. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and good afternoon to everybody. Well, I just prepared this presentation, but going to your question, the funding gap now it's quite huge compared to the US block and the Chinese block, and especially in the digital. But of course, Europe is putting a lot of efforts over the last 5 years. For example, European Investment Bank, which is a project financing bank since the establishment in 1958, in 2015, also to the HEFSI, or so-called Juncker Plan, started an equity strategy to support the startups at the most innovative sector, like, for example, cybersecurity. And we try to deploy some money to these startup or SMEs. Just to make a definition, SME for us is a company which has less than 3,000 full-time equivalent employees, but we are mostly focused on companies with less than 500 full-time equivalent, because this segment should be much more protected. And since we noticed that over the last 15 years, the most interesting technology and companies went to USA to be financed, and basically we lost knowledge and opportunities. So the funding gap is huge. We are talking about 120 billion invested per year in venture capital in SMEs in USA against the 25-13 billion in Europe. So basically, we consider that in 10 years, we will reach the same level of USA today if we run at the same pace. So that's why the gap is huge. It is mostly important, relevant in any sector, especially in the digital one. Yeah.
Fabrizio, sorry, because you mentioned these definitions that you are applying, which makes indeed sense, at least from an investment point of view. But do you also have a minimum level of full-time equivalents that you consider like being eligible or interesting for funding, or you don't have that?
No, minimum, no. We split small and mid cap. So for us, a small cap is below 250, and the mid cap is from 250 to 3,000. But again, as I told you, the mid cap, usually we try to finance with the standard loan, the real mid cap. So for us, a big small cap, it's something like a small mid cap. It's between 250 and 500. This company for us is the best one because it's not so early, so it's not so risky. At the same time, it has still growth potential, and so basically we can invest, because this equity strategy is we provide basically so-called venture loan, but is compared to a normal venture loan is more a quasi equity because it's a bullet loan. So basically the bank gives to the SME money today. It will ask back in 5 years without any repayment of the principal. Usually the venture debt loan in the private sector is 3 years amortizing, so it's a very quick. There is a very quick repayment. But at the same, so we address non-rated companies, so we don't mind if the SME is loss-making, etc. It's important that there is a growth potential. So we're not interested to companies who are profitable but are growing at 1-2% per year. I know that you cover all these kind of SMEs, but in this case, since we need to address, because of the high risk of the product, we need to address high growth potential companies. In this context, especially for this panel, we are quite focused on the cybersecurity since 2 years. Of course, we are not so expert about blockchain, and we have, as you may understand, we as a European institution, we are quite reluctant to invest in blockchain related startups or SMEs.
But however, we have created internally a definition of trust tech. Trust tech for us is the technology or services that enable to create a trust among humans, machines, processes, and companies. In this broader, let's say, sector, we have invested mostly in the Northern Europe because it's more active for us, especially in Germany. We are invested in Netherlands and also in Sweden. So we have a few examples of trust tech companies. Identity management software that enable to manage, analyze the threat about security and security defense, cyber security, of course, defense. So we try to do our best effort. What we are doing now is we are trying to, along with the European Commission, to set up something specific for cybersecurity. There are ongoing discussions with some DGs within the European Commission. We have just prepared a presentation. We will go to our internal committees to try to make a strategy for the next 3 years. And among the several sectors we would like to address our efforts, there is also cybersecurity, or as I told you, the so-called trust tech.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Fabrizio. I guess, do you have more slides you wanted to show, or you want to?
Well, the slides I wanted to show, but again, we already more or less talk about these slides. This product is more for late stage startups. So, as I told you, we are quite interested in the startups with 50 above full-time equivalent. We already go-to-market strategy, which have already raised at least 10 million equity and through a Series A or Series B with the venture capital. This is our, let's say, typical standard target as SME. And then we can. That's why we would like to set up a specific, fully dedicated facility for cybersecurity, because we understand that there are not so many SMEs in this sector with our requirements. And so that's why we are trying to set up a facility fully backed by European Commission or backed by the guarantee of the European Commission, as we have in other sectors. For example, in the energy, we have an energy demonstration project. We have an infection disease facility, which helped also the development of the vaccine for COVID. We have other facility also in the innovation in the transportation. So why not? We can have also a facility for cybersecurity.
Okay. I will have more questions for you perhaps later about this finance gap between us and the rest of the world. Let me continue with introducing the second speaker, Rafael Kerbueno, who represents here Transparency International, which is an NGO that is really keen on transparency, especially in lobbying. And you have been producing yourself a report on big tech lobbying, and we found this report extremely interesting. We have published some of the statistics, and whenever we mention the numbers, the difference between what we or SMEs can invest, the money they can invest to represent themselves, and the money that especially the US technology companies are investing, companies like Google or Amazon or Facebook are investing. The difference is 100 or 1,000 multiplication. So it is really, when we say these numbers to people, everyone is like, okay. then this explains many things. Please let us know a little bit, tell us a bit more about your work and share with us a bit your findings, please.
So thank you very much, Sebastiano, for this great introduction, and thank you for inviting us today to provide a little bit of a different take on this subject area, which is that of civil society organizations. Just maybe a little bit of a brief word on Transparency International. We are the global leading movement in anti-corruption work. And here in Brussels, we look specifically at trying to get better political integrity in the EU institutions. And a subset of that is better lobby transparency rules. So part of these our lobby transparency work, we've published in March of this year a report on big tech lobbying in Brussels. As you can see the picture here, we have Mark Zuckerberg shaking hands with Antonio Tajani, who's the president of the European Parliament. And the objective of the report was really twofold. First, it was sort of to see sort of the outsized role that big tech plays in our society, if that translates also in sort of an outsized role in the Brussels lobbying scene. And the second objective was to test the lobby transparency rules that are applicable in the EU institutions and to see where there are gaps and formulate targeted recommendations. Now, just one caveat, I understand that not everybody is very completely familiar with the lobby transparency rules. So I'm going to take you on a step-by-step approach and try to see together what kind of information we can see and start building this lobbying footprint of big tech companies. So next slide, please. So let me start with a headline figure, 19 million euros. This is the combined lobbying budget of the big 5 big tech companies. So Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. And we have this number because we have a transparency register that is commonly held by the EU institutions, where lobby organizations must declare all the means that they use to try to influence decisions. So we have who they are, the interest that they represent, the files that they follow, and also the lobbying budget. Now, if you take this 19 million euros annual budget, it's just a drop in the water of the 1.6 billion euros that are declared by the 12,000 organizations that are on the transparency register. But the interesting fact is, if I attract your attention to the graph, is simply the increase over time of this budget. In 2014, which is sort of the starting point where this register was starting to have more accurate information, that's what we started there. If you see in 2014, these big tech companies were sort of mid-range lobby organization, not having a massive impact, let's say, on the decision-making process. And then slowly but surely, they've increased over time. In fact, this increase is really massive. If you look for Facebook, it's 1,000%. For Apple, it's 400%. And to the point where Google, Facebook, and Microsoft are now in the top 5 companies with the highest EU lobbying budget in Brussels. And so today we're talking a little bit about digital sovereignty, and to think that these budgets are actually bigger than some of the most established companies in Europe. So these budgets are bigger than Airbus, it's bigger than Volkswagen. And the question that we can derive from this is, first of all, why is there such a huge increase in the lobbying budget? And the second key question is, does it actually translate into access, into influence in the EU institutions? And for that, we need a sort of a proxy measure. So next slide, please. Next, yes. Fantastic. And so the proxy measure that we have, luckily, we have such a proxy measure in the European Commission because the Commission started publishing its high-level meetings in 2014. This was a decision by President Juncker to sort of shift gears in lobby transparency. And it's a requirement for commissioners, cabinet members, and director generals to publish all their lobby meetings with the lobbyists that are on the transparency register. Now, before we go into the numbers, I just want to set a little bit the stage. Organizing a high-level meeting with a commissioner is a significant undertaking. It requires time, it requires resources, and it requires careful planning. And here again, if we look at the big tech companies, they really are top of the charts. Of the 14,000 high-level meetings that we analyzed for this report, we see that Google, Facebook, and Microsoft are reaching the top 10. In fact, Google itself ranks second place, which is very significant for a company that only in 2014 was a mid-range lobby organization. And maybe a little fun fact, under the Juncker Commission, if you take into account the time that the commission was closed, Google had one high-level meeting per week. So if we put this into perspective with organizations such as Transparency International, we have since 2014 40 high-level meetings. Now, of course, the reason also is that, as I said, it requires a lot of resources to organize these meetings. And for us, because resources are limited, it is much more advantageous to lobby at the lower level, for which currently in the Commission we don't have the data. So it's possible that if we had all the meetings that are below, maybe this data would be a bit different. But still, one high-level meeting per week is quite significant. Now, the other findings that we saw in this data as well, and which can answer the first question of why this lobbying budget has increased, is that digital policies are by far the most lobbyist policy areas in Brussels. On the Juncker Commission, it was nearly 30%, and now under the von der Leyen Commission, and we're still a little bit early in the mandate, it is already representing 20% of all high-level meetings. And what we can also do with this data is try to see if there is a problem of access. Now, if you look at the graphs, we did this more from the perspective of civil society organizations. So we group by different categories because the information that the Commission published is very structured. And we can see by different types of organization that there is a sort of unequal access between different types of lobbyists. The reason for this is that basically commissioners and even the lower-ranking officials can decide whether to accept a meeting or not. It's up to them to say, I grant you a meeting or I don't. And some have sort of they have a view of trying to give this balanced access, and it's a direct order from the commissioner to the lower ranking, and others just don't do that. And maybe we can come to that point a bit later in the discussion. Now, the other element that we can get from this data, if we're building this lobbying footprint of big tech companies, is looking at connected organizations. Next slide, please. So the Lobby Transparency Register requires organizations to say who they're connected to. This connection is not necessarily a financial connection. It can be a membership of an industry association. It can be a grouping of NGOs that together are doing a lobbying for a very specific purpose, like lobby transparency. But it's still interesting to see that this is one way of not putting all your eggs in the same basket. So the findings that we have here is that we found 66 of such connected organizations for big tech companies, which together add a whopping 1,500 extra high-level commission meetings. And of those high-level commission meetings, we found that around 1/3 were specifically on digital policies. But the biggest, more striking finding of these connected organizations is just the sheer diversity of organizations that are connected to big tech. We have business associations, which is something that we expect. We have think tanks, but we also have NGOs. And it doesn't necessarily mean that these organizations are lobbying on behalf of big tech, but it allows big tech companies to sort of set the stage in Brussels and also share information, share knowledge, or gain knowledge. But it's really a viable strategy of just trying to open up as many doorways as you can into the decision-making process. The other findings of this data set is the 26 consultancies that that have contracts with big tech, and they together earn between 3 and 6 million euros. And these consultancies also provide very expert knowledge to the big tech companies on how to effectively lobby the EU institutions. So if you see here, if we're looking this is just from the data from the Commission, we can get a sense that, okay, the budget that the big tech companies have does translate into quite significant access to the European Commission. But of course, the European Commission is just part of the decision-making process. We also have to look at the other two institutions. And this is where we're going to start to hit the limit with the lobby transparency rules. Next slide, please. So if we look at the European Parliament, fortunately, they also do publish lobby meetings, but it is not tied to the lobby transparency register. It's actually tied to internal rules. And only specific MEPs have to publish lobby meetings, which are rapporteur, shadow rapporteur, and committee chairs. And these are MEPs that are in charge of pushing legislative files through the European Parliament. So they are the ones that naturally are being the most lobbied. All the other MEPs are falling on a voluntary publication, which basically means that it completely skews the data. Despite the fact that we have, at the time of the publication of the report, we had 13,000 meetings. Today, it stands at 12,000 meetings. I could only find 150 meetings with the big tech companies. So the kind of role that we see in the Commission is not reflected in the Parliament because we have mostly this voluntary publication mechanism. And as you can see from the graph, at the time, only nearly 1 out of 2 MEPs had published one single meeting. And also, maybe part of the reason is that at the time of publication, some of the more important digital files had yet to reach Parliament. So I decided for you today to look at the data again to see if something had changed, because there has been a lot of discussion around the Digital Services Act and the Digital Services Act. And basically what I found is that the number of meetings has doubled. So now we have 300 meetings with big tech companies. So again, I think the actual figure is probably significantly higher. And then we look at the third institution, which is the Council of the EU, which represents the interest of member states. And they only recently joined the Transparency Register. So unfortunately, there's simply no data available. It's just a big black box, and we do not know what's happening there. And when I was writing this report, I thought, okay, we cannot stop it there. We need to sort of know if member states are being lobbied. And this is why we try to look at the national level. And there are 2 countries in the EU which have lobby transparency register. Next slide, please.
Coming.
Thank you very much. And that is France and, incidentally, and I think this is more interesting for you, Ireland. We also looked at the UK as a control country, but I'm not going to address this here today for obvious reasons. But what we tried to see is if what the proportion of lobbying, national lobbying, in these 2 countries concerned EU policies. And the findings are quite striking. If we take the example of Ireland, which we know is sort of the headquarters of both Google and Facebook, we found for Google that over half of the declared lobbying activities concerned EU policies, which means that it doesn't mean that Ireland is lobbying on behalf of big tech, but certainly Google sees and is putting the means to lobby the Irish government to try to influence policies in Brussels. There's a similar story that we see in France, where a third of all the activities that we found for the combined 5 big tech companies concerned EU policies. And this is also a very effective strategy that is also employed by Transparency International. We have chapters in many EU member states, and we sort of coordinate with those chapters to try to get governments on board. But if you sort of combine that with all the means available with big tech, and if you imagine the connected organizations that we have here in Brussels and recreating such a network also nationally, you can see that it's starting to build sort of a very big spread and creating as many opportunities as you can to influence decisions and using the available resources that you have. And so, next slide, please. And so in general terms, we basically right now, when we talk about big tech lobbying, we have only, in Brussels, we only have a partial picture. We can understand the general trend that there is a very big role and there is a lot of access, but to really get a sort of empirical evidence, we would need the same lobby transparency rules that are applicable in the Commission to the 2 other institutions. And going a step further, we would also need to have lobby registers nationally where you can actually see what the share is of EU lobbying, so that you can see the entire spread. Yeah, I mean, thank you very much. I'm open to questions. I hope this was actually interesting. I understand it's a bit of a different take.
Well, it was very interesting, especially because you understand where we come from, being the underdog in this, of course, in this discussion. Okay, questions. Indeed, there's going to be many, I suppose, at least from my side, but we'll keep them for later. I'd like then to introduce the next speaker. So after a point of view of an NGO, I'd like to have a point of view. We wanted to have a point of view for the research from a think tank. And here we're talking in particular about the Bruegel, a very well-known think tank in Brussels. I'm happy to have with us Nicolas Frederic Poitier, who's a PhD research fellow at Bruegel. And you have been looking yourself at these issues of digital sovereignty. Nicolas, especially, I know about, you've been looking a lot into the issue of data transfers and flow of data to EU and US. So you have a few slides also. So please feel free to share with us your thoughts.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much, Sebastiano, and then Digital SME for this opportunity to present the research that I and some of my colleagues at Bruegel have done on digital, or the geopolitical challenge that we see about in the digital sector. Today, I'm going to talk about two work streams that I've been working on over the last year, and I think that's going to shape, also going to turn out over the next year, and that I think are really central to this question of digital sovereignty that you put in your white paper, and I think that is kind of the headline of this whole conference. And I think the first one is I'm going to talk about is, as you mentioned, data streams and what's happening there, and this binds very much with the digital regulation that we just heard of from Raphael about the lobbying that is happening around these issues. And the second one, I'm going to talk a bit about semiconductors. I'm not sure to which extent you also represent hardware companies, but of course, as a digital company, the hardware on which you run your services is also very crucial. To kind of bind this whole thing together, I want to start a little bit with basically the background that we see, and the background is really that we have this narrative. We can discuss maybe later to which extent this is true, but we have this narrative of a rise of geopolitical tensions, which is tightly linked to the rise of China. So China, just as an economy, has grown tremendously, has taken much more space in the world economy. And what we see now is a more and more adversarial relationship with the US, some argue it comes from China, but also coming from the US. And we see a shift in the logic from the kind of positive sum logic that economists like to talk about. If you talk about a trade economist like myself, we always talk about the benefits of trade, and then we all benefit from an open economy. But and then basically that if we are open to trade in this kind of economic models, it's always that everyone benefits from open to trade, and there's a positive sum. If we're open, we all have more, so we benefit from China growing. But if you're a foreign policy person and you think about security policy, of course, relative sizes matter, and then it's basically maybe not so positive if your adversary is growing, if other countries are growing, because you're becoming relatively less powerful. And here's really we see a shift from the narrative, from this more kind of positive some economic narratives of open trade and globalization, to more of a zero-sum game where relative strength is basically the narrative we build around. And what we've seen here in the digital sector in particular is an involvement of what's called sometimes weaponization of interdependence, which is basically the usage of our connectedness, in particular in the digital sector, as means to further political goals. And in particular, we can think of extraterritorial sanctions, like we've seen, for instance, with semiconductors, which I will talk a bit in a moment. For instance, with the case of Huawei, where the US is not using their own semiconductors that they produce, but actually the IP that is embedded in semiconductors produced in Taiwan to kind of block a company that is seen as politically important in China. And we see this also in an environment. At the same time, we see a divergence of regulation between different blocks, and then most importantly, the US and Europe, and which also gave rise, together with kind of the rise of authoritarianism, to more and more data localizations, more and more rules for digital companies, where they can store their data under which conditions. And the overlying question that everyone now in Brussels asks themselves, that as I in this debate on strategic, is kind of what should we do? And the answer that we've come up so far, the Commission has come far, is this concept of open strategic autonomy that now everyone is trying to figure out what this actually means. And there's a bit of a tension here. I think that's going to be at the heart of whatever I'm going to talk about. So on the one hand, it is very much in the interest of the EU to be multilateral, to have open trade. It's still something I think that everyone in Europe recognizes as beneficial to us, and is also kind of the way going forward. But this is at odds with these kind of notions of economic sovereignty, that we should have more and more capabilities in Europe. And this, of course, means we need to kind of strengthen ourselves and also close ourselves to some extent. So I think this is the one tension, and this is the tension we see in regulation. But then also we have the tension of the internal cost of this kind of policies. And this is where we come to, for instance, to the CHIPS Act, where some of the things that some people think we should do in order to reach digital sovereignty is basically that we need to intervene more in markets, and this has costs. This has costs in terms of competition, making it maybe more difficult for SMEs. It has costs in terms of taxpayer monies. If we subsidize big manufacturers of semiconductors, for instance, to build factories in Europe, this is taxpayer money that everyone pays and money that will not be spent somewhere else. So I think this is kind of the tension where we have to go over. If you can go to the next slide. And one particular place where this plays out is the regulation around digital issues, digital services. We've seen this first big European regulation was GDPR, and it has become kind of a gold standard for privacy rules. And I think something that many people in Brussels consider a great success, despite the cookie banners, which actually have nothing to do with GDPR, but despite all the hiccups that we have and the struggles that many companies have, it is somewhere where actually Brussels really, or Europe really asserted itself in a way. But of course, this has created a lot of tensions, and some academics call this the data realms that we see now, which is on the one hand, we have the US, which has very much a laissez-faire regulation, very little regulation, particularly with privacy, but also this kind of digital giants that also dominate our European landscape. Then we have the European sphere, where we see more and more regulation, strong focus on privacy, which has is a fundamental right, but we all kind of struggle with the fact that all our services, digital services that we have in Europe, are not genuinely European. And as a third kind of representative of more and more, also more authoritarian countries, we see Russia now with an evolving agenda in this regard, closed markets where they basically close them to an external competition. The big tech that we know in Europe doesn't operate. Also for SMEs, it's basically not possible if you're in digital services to operate in China. They grow their own kind of competitors, but they have a lot of political control. And basically the overarching priority is always this political control. And this makes it more and more difficult, if not impossible, to trade digital services over digital means. In China, as it is right now, there's virtually no trade in digital services. Services market in China has always been closed. And also GDPR rules also make it very difficult, if not impossible, for instance, Chinese operators to operate in Europe. TikTok being here the exception to the rule, they have very much a Chinese wall between what they do in China and what they do in Europe, not just for European privacy reasons, but simply because of the censorship that's in China. But basically, it's very difficult. But we also see now this kind of chasm opening between Europe and the US, both in terms of privacy. Here, really the question, we had this privacy shield ruling by the ECJ that ended data transfers or might end data transfers, is still in process with the standard contractual clauses, the alternative mechanism. But it's really a question mark if this will hold up, what will happen now. Rumors are we will find a new agreement, but it's very wobbly, if you want. And we see more of this if we see the other regulations, the EU, we might see more divergence, not just because of different preferences between the EU and the US, but also because of different capabilities. That it's at this point in Washington, it's very difficult for Washington politics to agree on anything. So even though there might be also in the US, there is a strong discomfort with what's happening in big tech, the roles that social networks play in their democracy, they find it very difficult to pass any regulation for numerous reasons. And this will probably get more difficult with European new legislations that might lead to further diversification. And I think this has really kind of fragmenting the international digital sphere we see. And if you look at the WTO, which might be one body where we negotiate this kind of privacy rules, for instance, are completely off the table. We're so far apart in our concepts and our basic understanding that we will not see anything happening here anytime soon. So really here, I think a very grim picture, more barriers that are coming up. And of course, this has all kinds of effects. Maybe we come back to this in the end. If you go now to the hardware side, if you can go to the next slide, if we talk, for instance, about semiconductors, the world looks very different. And here, whereas a big tech in terms of software is an American game, the entire hardware that we get mostly from China. But the chips in this hardware, in this laptop, which I do it's an American brand laptop I do this presentation on. The laptop is manufactured in China, but these chips are basically almost all, at least the high-end chips, are all imported to China. And this has been used for sanctions by the US. This has led to a big push by China trying to get rid of this dependence. And here on the right, we see a chart that shows that 96% of what is classified as high-tech trade from China to the US is ICT goods, laptops, webcams, whatever. But this is really a very, very important industry for China. But this hasn't made it a target of geopolitics. And that's one reason why these semiconductors has become such an important topic in the political debate, together with the shortage that we see. And now there's this kind of shift in narrative that there's a strong sense of this is the most important industry, but actually, if you look where the chips are manufactured, neither Europe nor the US really has the manufacturing at the high end. And the question is, should we do something about it? And there we come to kind of the industrial policy side of this debate. If you actually look at the trade, it's an East Asian game. So we don't demand chips. We also don't produce chips. And the question mark, should we build something up here? And if you can go to the next slide. The problem with this narrative in our sense, so in our research, we say this is probably a mistake to focus too much on this kind of manufacturing, is because if you look at the actually other stages, not just the manufacturing of the chips itself, but also, for instance, the design on the chips, on the how these chips are designed, here really it's different place. It's a very complex, specialized supply chain, while fabrication, so the actual fabrication of the chip is a Taiwanese-dominated business, or maybe dominated by South Korea and Taiwan. So this is fabless manufacturing. If you go to the integrated manufacturers, you also have a big US presence, but this is not the high end anymore. But in the design, for instance, US is dominating. If you go on what we don't have on this slide, the equipment, the machines on which the high-end chips are produced are entirely European. There's just one company that can provide this. So really our sense is that it is not necessary to have this kind of fabrication itself. We don't really have the demand at the moment. But and also we can have other parts of the value chains where we can have which are as important, which also no one can work without, where we also can maybe cheaper get geopolitical leverage. Can we go to the next slide, please? The problem, of course, I mean, that is now our opinion as the academics and think tankers. The question is, where do we land with this? I think the struggle that we have, and this is the third point here, the struggle that we have in Brussels right now is the question is, should we and how much should we do there? The one thing is basically the first question, should we have this? My opinion is we don't need this. We don't need this kind of subsidy programs. This might not be the dominant position. I think this is something we will see what will happen with the CHIPS Act. But the other issue is if we have this, our state aid tools are probably not up to the task. So, or maybe not up to the task. They are not meant to allow this kind of things. If you look at what we've done in the past with state aid, or what state aid tool we have right now, the strongest tool that we have in the sector is what's called the ICPI, which is an instrument that is meant to support innovation in first industrial deployment. It is not really meant to kind of have technology transfers and just subsidize capacity building in a specific sector. Also, if we compare the scale, now Thierry Breton, first we had very different figures, but now he talks about matching the US figures, and we're really at risk of having a subsidy war, of spending something like 40 billion on getting this manufacturing capacity. This is way off the charts of anything else we've done in this kind of state aid in the past. So really here's the question, where we will end is probably, it is really up, it's not clear yet, but if this CHIPS Act would go forward, and if actually the priorities in this CHIPS Act stay what they are right now, and then the member states agree to this, we might see much more state aid and maybe weakening of the state aid rules. And for many, many reasons, I think this is very problematic. Really, the problem here is we see the geopolitical. It reminds me a bit about the European champions debate we had when the Siemens-Alstom merger was when the discussion. There's really this geopolitical narrative in industrial policy that says we really need to get rid of our state aid restriction or maybe our merger restrictions. But of course, it would be at a disadvantage for small companies that might not have the same access to this kind of subsidy funds, might not have the same geopolitical or capacities that they consider geopolitically important. And also, of course, if we have more rules, maybe subsidies, or if it is also maybe import restrictions or something like this, local content requirement, whatever we can think of as tools, they could rise cost for SMEs. Similarly, if we talk about barriers to digital trade, on the one hand, this creates a bit of more of a shielded market, maybe for European SMEs, some protectionism if we have local de facto localization requirement. The Commission is very clear, and they don't consider a privacy trade barrier, but de facto it is. Then this will create some protection for SMEs, but it also will put barriers to export, make it more difficult for SMEs to export. Large companies can afford to have legal departments in every jurisdiction they operate in. this is more difficult for SMEs. Maybe to wrap up here, I'm already running out of time. Just to say, we have now this initiative, the European Trade and Technology Council, and I think the attempt from the European side is really to look at this regulation and the barriers to digital trades and to try to overcome them and try to find solutions. But I fear we are not even there yet. We still need to first understand what's the challenges and agree with Americans what's the challenges. For Americans, this is really about China, containing China and making sure they are kept in check. In Europe, I think the attempt is really to reduce the barriers in transatlantic trade. And as long as we have this kind of diverging narratives, I think we will not go any further. Anyway, this is the brief tour of this topic, and looking forward to the discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Niklas. I think it was very interesting. I will have some questions, but let me follow some order. Otherwise, we'll dig only with you, because we really don't have a lot of time left. Perhaps, first of all, let me remind everyone that you can ask questions using the function on the chat and question box. But I wanted to start with perhaps with Fabrizio, because he's the one who has spoken the last until now. And so really, Fabrizio, to go back to the topic of your introduction regarding the finance gap. So what do you think we can do in Europe to really scale up our companies and address this finance gap against especially the US?
Well, I think we should put more efforts. We are doing a lot of efforts. As I told you before, we are investing a lot. So we have been investing a lot over the last 5 years. We have to follow this path and try to fill the gap as soon as possible. Maybe before the 10 years. As we predict, because if we go at the same pace of USA over the last 10 years, we will reach today the level of USA today in 10 years. So it's quite a lot of time. But yeah.
Is it too late, 10 years, to catch up?
Yeah, it's too late, because maybe in 10 years the USA will grow much farther. So we need to fill the gap also, because part of the investment of the USA is made toward European companies. So at least we should invest more in order to keep European technologies in Europe. And I guess only if we try to defend these technologies, we will fill the gap by half, because what's happening today is most of the companies are funded by US investors, and but they are initially based in Europe. But what's happening with the second investment round or the third investment round, the US investor starts asking to the company to move the IPs and also the R&D team to USA. And so if we can stop the first round already, we don't have any issue, because even if we co-share the investment between a US investor, the European company will stay in Europe, because of course the European company would like to have a European investor. The problem is today there are not so many. What's happening also today is that the several financial investors are becoming specialized. So if you are in the space sector, for example, you can find easily not hundreds, but let's say not less than 20, 30 specialized investors in the space sector on NASDAQ or also in the VC. In Europe, we set up 2 European fintechs, the European Commission, which started the space innovation space pilot, but at the end there is only one fund specialized in space. In digital, for example, in cybersecurity, we don't have so many funds interested and specialized in the cybersecurity. We are trying, for example, now to support one of them, But again, in USA there are much more funds specialized in cybersecurity. And of course, the great technology or the possible killer application will go to USA also because there is more funding, but also the valuation is much higher. So.
Okay. Thank you, Fabrizio. I think it for me it also partly connects with the things that Niklas has been saying, because there was something that for me was when I heard his presentation, especially when you talk about state aid, Niklas, and you being slightly critical about these big investments in chips and so on. When you think about the SMEs, because you seem to be negative about the effects on SMEs, don't you think that an investment, which you can call state aid, on a certain industrial capacity, indeed it will not go directly into SMEs? I agree with you, but would it not create positive externalities for a broader SME ecosystem and SME community of suppliers or companies that would anyway be able to build on top of that industrial capacity because they are part of the value chain more in general, or even just because there is knowledge which is created, and then therefore you have positive spillovers in the SME ecosystem? You don't have that impression?
So I think the question is always, I think we have two problems in industrial policy in Europe. I mean, the first one is if we think about, for instance, about venture, we don't have so what the US have that we don't have is this kind of venture capital equity financing. And I'm not sure if the European approach, which is really built around about state providing banking for finance, if it can really match the capital financing or the equity financing we see in the US. And I think this is really a huge problem that no state aid can kind of resolve. I think on the state aid question, so I think there's two problems with this. The first one is the access to the aid. That not always are big and small in competition, and of course there are very few SMEs that will be in competition with someone like Samsung in a direct competition that might be beneficiary or Intel from the state aid. Nevertheless, and there is an attempt, and we don't know what's going to come out, but there's a revision going on on this state aid tools, which is intended to give more access to SMEs. But these projects, if you look at how the projects are designed, there's a bit of question mark to whom's purpose are they designed? Are they really designed in the sense of there's a clear European goal and we want to further that, and then basically look at projects, or is it more a member state wanting having a specific industry they want to benefit? And these going to be mostly not industries that are very SME friendly. So I think there is a bit of a playing field issue here, that the industries that are that are supported from these are probably not the industries where SMEs are strong. I think the second problem is just opportunity cost, as we economists would like to say. If you look at the size of what's proposed now, so the numbers don't add up to what Breton is proposing. So if someone at Politico did the exercise of adding all what we know at state aid, and that was proposed in a very generous way, we don't come to half of what is proposed in the CHIPS Act. But if we take the number for granted that Mr. Breton is proposing, this is for something like 40-50 billion, that's half of Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe, budget. So it really is not just the question of does the specific state aid harm a specific SME, but what else would we do with this money, and how would that maybe benefit SMEs? So I would be much more in favor of using this money maybe for R&D projects, which also have positive spillovers, than using them to kind of building some kind of geopolitical capacity where I don't see the case for it yet that is actually necessary.
Yeah, that's a valid point. I think you're putting things into perspective, giving the figure. It's difficult to disagree with you. Let me go to Raphael, because there's also a question from Patrick for you. But before we go into that, perhaps Raphael, because course, out of your report, we see clear imbalances between the big tech lobbying efforts and those of civil society or smaller companies. So do you have any recommendation on your side? I mean, you have partly addressed that. Do you want to elaborate a bit on what would you think would be needed? I mean, do you think we need, I don't know, public support for organizations that represent civil society or SMEs? Mind you, I know that has been done in some areas, like there is a regulation that really foresees a budget for the representation of SMEs or environmental interest in standardization. So should we do the same for the representation of these interests more in general, or do you see any other possibility to rebalance the situation?
Well, I think it's a very valid point and a very good question. And let me just start by saying that in 2014, President Juncker put in his guidelines to his commissioners that they had to guarantee equal access to different actors. But it's just a guideline. So basically, perhaps at the first step, and if we have the empirical evidence for it, is that beyond the guideline, that maybe we can have a rule that is a bit more enforceable to ensure that every director general, every commissioner, every cabinet member make sure that they meet with all the representatives of civil society, of think tanks, of academia, and making sure that every actor that seeks to influence decision has a chance to speak and to give their take on the rule. But then obviously there's a second element, because if we look at digital policies and the link with civil society, there's really a capacity issue. Just a capacity issue in terms of knowledge, not just resource, because we are talking about extremely technical files, but they also have societal implications. So one of the demands that we formulate is obviously to build our internal capacity, which is something that we're trying to do either with external donors, perhaps through the European Commission, but to build up our internal knowledge. And this is maybe something that could also be applicable to SMEs, and not just knowledge, technical knowledge, but perhaps also knowledge on how to effectively lobby. Because we are becoming here in Brussels, we're a bit specialist, but people a bit outside might be not so well versed. So really, capacity and perhaps this sort of equal access rule would be sort of my two main takes on trying to redress this.
Yeah, I think you make a fair point there. On one hand, unfortunately, I don't think it is enough to ensure the access is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You can have. They can give you a rule that gives access to NGOs or SMEs to, commissioners on an equal level. But then when you go to these meetings, you have to come up with proposals, with documents. And if Google comes with, 1,000 pages, and I can only come with one page because I couldn't develop anything else, of course, they will count 1,000 and I will count one. So there is a capacity issue.
Absolutely, that's the technical expertise, because if we saw that Google had nearly one high-level meeting per week, you don't come to such a meeting with nothing. It's just not just to have a friendly chat. You're coming with purpose. And so when we organize those meetings, it takes us up to 3 months to prepare them, and because we want to make sure that we have 1 hour and it's just we have one shot of getting our message across to the top level of the European Commission. So all the work that goes behind it is very impressive. So that's really feeds into that capacity issue.
Yeah. Okay. I think we are unfortunately getting towards the end, but I see we have a lot of interesting conversation, and there's going to be questions we won't be able to answer because it's just 2 minutes before the end. So before we quit, I wanted to give the chance for the last, maybe 10 or 30 seconds to each of you to let us know your final thoughts, the things whatever you want to leave as a key message to our audience. Maybe I will start with Fabrizio, then Niklas, then Rafael.
Yeah, thanks, Sebastiano. Well, no, my message is positive. I think we are in the good path to close the gap, to support the SMEs. Of course, we need to put much more effort, but I guess that we will be able maybe in 5 years to close this gap.
Okay, thank you, Fabrizio, for the very positive note as a conclusion. Niklas.
maybe just to say, I think we have many challenges in this area if we want to become more autonomous or sovereign or whatever you want to call it. I think it's important to look at the specific challenges, not to despair about a specific problem that we might not see how to solve. But we just heard from Fabrizio. I think these are specific. We have to address the individual problems, and I think many of them are solvable. Many of them just need political buy-in, and that's I think what we have to work on. If we think about venture capital or venture, what you say, a lot of this is a question. It's not. I think everyone understands the problem. The problem is kind of overcoming the political challenges on a political level.
Excellent, thank you. And last but not least, Rafael.
So from our perspective and listening to the very interesting presentation from Fabrizio and Niklas, it's clearly there's a lot of stakes that is being decided today in Brussels. And for that reason, it's very important that everyone understands how decisions are being made. And so my take is that more lobby transparency will allow us to understand also who is trying to seek to influence decisions, and at the same time address, for example, questions of whether there is an imbalance in capacity.
Okay, excellent. So with this, I would like to thank the three of you for your participation and all the audience. I think overall, I can say I'm quite satisfied because this event about digital sovereignty by SMEs and for SMEs, at least I think I'm sure we have been able to bring SMEs at the center of the discussion, which is one of the main goals of this organization. And we're hearing that all of you somehow have been thinking about this, have been contributing to this from different perspectives, from the entrepreneurs, from the policymakers, from the research, from the NGOs. I'm quite happy, and I think we can call it a success, at least to start really putting the topic on the table and continuing, our work on behalf of the digital SMEs in Europe. So thank you all for participating. This was the General Assembly 2001. We will certainly look forward to seeing you in 2022, hopefully with new topics and new interesting speakers. Goodbye and good afternoon, everyone.